I'm responsible for the performances of the characters. So there's, yeah, there's a lot that goes into that. Probably the biggest thing is actually hiring the right crew, to be honest with you. This has been a particularly interesting challenge on this show for me because feature animation hasn't been done in London for, well, over 10 years. So London is quite well known for doing very high-level visual effects, but not so much feature animation. So we had to cast a very wide net, and so we have a super international crew, I would say, on this show. We've got people from all over Europe, of course, and the UK, but also from Korea, from India, really all over the planet, the States. Once I get the crew in place, then my job is to take John's vision and the vision of the story crew and the vision of the layout crew and try and expedite that in as efficient a way as we can, but also to push the performance at every level. Always looking for ways to plus the movie, plus the entertainment value, add humor, add depth. At that point, I had a young daughter, and I went to see the film, and I have to say, I was super charmed. I thought that they took a bunch of, unlikely variables and put them together and did it with heart and love, and it showed on the screen. It actually made for a very warm, charming, innocent but playful film, and I was attracted to that, definitely, for this film. But I was also attracted to the idea of doing something completely different. Which is what John wanted to do. He wanted to bring, that great cast of characters to London and do a much bigger film, and therefore it was had the charm of the first film and the characters, but it was a much bigger opportunity to challenge myself and my crew coming in. So I definitely felt because, as I say, the charm of the original characters and the challenges of the film that John was trying to make, that we had the opportunity to have a lot of growth and to show an audience something they haven't seen. Sherlock Gnomes, as voiced by Johnny Depp, and Dr. Watson, as voiced by Chiwetel Ejiofor, are new garden gnomes to help tell the story. In fact, they define our story in many ways, because this isn't, as I mentioned before, a small romantic comedy as Gnomeo and Juliet was, based on Romeo and Juliet. This is a Sherlock Holmes story that we're telling with our garden gnomes. So it's Sherlock Holmes, or Sherlock Gnomes, the gnome version of Sherlock Holmes, and the Watson gnome version of Dr. Watson are not just helping with the story, but defining the style of our movie. It's therefore a big action-adventure mystery set piece. All the more reason that we wanted to play it in London, because we've got a lot of interesting, a lot of iconic sites that we can explore with our garden gnomes. One of the biggest things that was interesting for us on this show was exploiting the concept of truth in materials. We've got ceramic garden gnomes, we have wooden dolls, we have stone gargoyles, all of these different kind of creatures that would move in different ways based on what they were made of, and not just how they would hit the ground, although that is part of what we do try to pay attention to their physicality, but also how would those characters behave given their life experience. How a stone gargoyle would deal with fire as an obstacle would be completely different than a paper doll or a stuffed animal, per se. So we, as animators, could not only deal with the physical part of the materials as to how they would move around, but also how they would behave, so we could make much more interesting acting choices for our characters based on their structure, if that makes sense. It's just bigger scope. So bigger scope means more challenging. Again, the first movie was essentially told in two gardens a little bit of a street, a little bit of an alley, and a little bit of a park, and that was pretty much the entire movie. For this film, because it's set in all of London, we've had to build a big part of London. We have had to build and populate the Natural History Museum, streets of London, Chinatown, the Underground, various gardens where gnomes are being stolen from. It's the scale of this film is, I don't know what the percentage is, but the scale of this film is massively larger than the first film was. So it's just in sheer numbers, it's much more of a challenge. The thing that's probably more specific to animation is doing our best to pay attention to what I call gnome logic, because our garden gnomes do have to freeze if humans are around. And in a small village like Stratford for the first film, that's not that big a deal for the garden gnomes to remain hidden. But in all of London, trying to run around the whole place and solve crimes and rescue gnomes, it's a much bigger deal to try and pay attention to the gnome logic. So we have to come up with a lot of different kinds of hiding places and a lot of different kinds of behaviors to try and deal with that. So that's certainly been a big challenge for us on this movie.